Is Trump making everything more expensive? It's a question millions of Americans are asking every time they walk into a grocery store, pay their rent, fill up their gas tank, or open another monthly bill. Prices feel higher than ever, and many people are wondering whether Donald Trump's economic policies are helping or hurting their wallets. Supporters argue that Trump's policies protect American jobs and strengthen the economy. Critics claim those same policies are making everyday goods more expensive. So what's actually happening? And more importantly, how does it affect the average American family? Today we're breaking down one of the biggest financial debates in America and answering the question: is Trump making everything more expensive? To understand the debate, we first need to understand why prices rise in the first place. Most people immediately think of inflation. Inflation occurs when the overall cost of goods and services increases over time. In simple terms, your money buys less than it used to. A gallon of milk that cost $3 may cost $4 a few years later. A grocery trip that once cost $100 may now cost $130. Inflation can be caused by many different factors, including government spending, supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, energy prices, and economic growth. Because so many forces affect prices, blaming any single politician for inflation is rarely straightforward. However, one area where presidential policies can have a more direct impact is tariffs. Tariffs have become one of the most discussed parts of Trump's economic agenda. A tariff is essentially a tax placed on imported goods. If a company imports products from another country and a tariff is added, that company now has to pay more to bring those products into the United States. The idea behind tariffs is simple. By making foreign goods more expensive, American-made products become more competitive. Supporters believe this helps domestic manufacturers, protects jobs, and encourages companies to invest in America instead of overseas. That sounds good in theory, but critics argue that tariffs often create unintended consequences. When companies face higher import costs, they frequently pass those costs on to consumers. In other words, if importing a product becomes more expensive, the company raises the price. The result is that American shoppers end up paying more. Imagine a retailer importing electronics from overseas. If tariffs increase the retailer's costs by 10%, the retailer may simply increase prices. The customer walking into the store may not realize it, but they're effectively paying part of that tariff. This is why economists often debate whether tariffs function as a tax on foreign countries or a tax on consumers. While tariffs are paid at the border by importers, many studies have found that at least some of those costs eventually show up in higher prices. The impact varies depending on the product, the industry, and how much competition exists in the market. But in many cases, consumers end up sharing the burden. Now let's talk about the argument from Trump's supporters. They would say focusing only on higher prices misses the bigger picture. If tariffs encourage companies to manufacture products in America, that could create jobs, increase wages, and strengthen local industries. Supporters argue that a slightly more expensive product may be worth it if it means more Americans are employed and earning higher incomes. They also point out that relying heavily on foreign manufacturing can create vulnerabilities. Supply chain disruptions during recent years showed how dependent many countries had become on overseas production. From this perspective, paying a little more today could potentially lead to a stronger economy tomorrow. Critics see things differently. They argue that higher prices disproportionately hurt lower-income and middle-class families. Wealthy households may barely notice an extra $50 on a shopping trip. But for families living paycheck to paycheck, every increase matters. Critics also argue that businesses often struggle to quickly move production back to America. Building factories, training workers, and restructuring supply chains takes time and money. As a result, consumers may experience higher prices long before any potential economic benefits arrive. But here's where the conversation gets more complicated. Even if tariffs contribute to higher prices, they're only one piece of the puzzle. Housing costs, healthcare expenses, labor shortages, energy prices, insurance premiums, and government spending all influence what Americans pay. That's why many economists caution against blaming inflation entirely on tariffs or any single policy. The economy is an enormous system with countless moving parts. Take housing, for example. Many Americans feel poorer today largely because housing costs have risen dramatically over the last several years. Mortgage rates increased, rent climbed in many cities. Property taxes rose. Insurance costs surged. None of these problems can be explained entirely by tariffs. Housing markets are influenced by supply, demand, interest rates, local regulations, and population growth. Even if tariffs disappeared tomorrow, housing affordability would likely remain a major challenge. The same is true for groceries. Food prices are affected by weather events, transportation costs, labor shortages, fuel prices, and global supply chains. Tariffs may influence some products, but they are rarely the only factor. That's why two people can look at the same grocery receipt and reach completely different conclusions about why prices are high. Another important point is that inflation itself creates psychological stress. When prices rise faster than wages, people feel like they're falling behind. Even if someone's income increases, higher costs can erase those gains. This is one reason why so many Americans feel financially trapped today. They may be earning more money than ever before, yet they still struggle to save, invest, or get ahead. The problem isn't always income. It's that expenses keep growing too. This brings us to a larger question. Even if Trump's policies raise some prices, does that automatically mean they're bad? The answer depends on what outcome you're measuring. If your goal is lower consumer prices right now, tariffs may look negative. If your goal is stronger domestic manufacturing and economic independence, you may view them more positively. Economic policies often involve trade-offs. Benefits in one area can create costs in another. Unfortunately, politics often turns these trade-offs into simplistic arguments. One side says tariffs are destroying the economy. The other says tariffs are saving America. Reality is usually somewhere in the middle. Economic policies rarely produce only winners or only losers. Instead, different groups experience different outcomes. Some industries may benefit. Some consumers may pay more. Some workers may gain opportunities. Others may face higher costs. For the average American, the most important takeaway is understanding how these policies affect your own finances. Whether prices rise because of tariffs, inflation, supply chains, or housing shortages, the solution at the household level remains remarkably similar. Build an emergency fund. Reduce high-interest debt. Invest consistently. Increase your income when possible. Avoid lifestyle inflation. Focus on the factors you can control rather than obsessing over the ones you can't. The truth is that no president controls every price in the economy. Not Trump. Not Biden. Not anyone. Presidents can influence economic conditions through policies, taxes, tariffs, regulations, and spending decisions. But the economy is far larger and more complicated than any one person. Prices rise for many reasons, and understanding those reasons is essential if you want to make better financial decisions. So, is Trump making everything more expensive? The honest answer is that some of his policies, particularly tariffs, can contribute to higher prices on certain goods. But they are only one factor among many. Housing costs, energy prices, labor markets, supply chains, interest rates, and broader economic conditions all play major roles. The real story isn't about one politician. It's about understanding the forces shaping your financial life and learning how to navigate them. Because at the end of the day, the question isn't just whether prices are rising. The question is whether you're building a financial strategy that can survive rising prices no matter who's in the White House. And that may be the most important financial lesson of all.